Joe Scarborough, welcome to the Dispatch Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, Joe, I'm excited to have you on because I think you're one of the probably few people, maybe in politics, who understand, I think, Donald Trump very well at all. So you're somewhat of an oracle, I think, into him. But I want to begin with this. We're about 1 month into the Trump administration. Has anything surprised you?
I think so. I think the biggest surprise is the contrast with what happened in the first term. If you talk to people around Donald Trump in the first term and they tried to predict what was going to happen, let's say a month down the road, let alone over the next 100 days or a year, they would laugh and they would say, we don't know what's going to happen next month because he doesn't know what's going to happen next month. There really wasn't any roadmap. There wasn't really any game plan. And we are seeing a dramatic difference, even though he'll still tweet pictures of himself with a crown on his head, or he will choose President's Day to say the most un-American thing ever by saying, I can break what laws I ever want to break if I want to save the country. Those things are still out there. He'll still do unpredictable things because it's taken us a while to figure it out. But for him, the reaction, right, the outrage, that's fuel for him and for his political base. But as far as policy goes, this time, you know what? Believe people when they, the first time. I mean, everybody was talking about Project 2025. He was going, what? Project 20? Well, no. I mean, there is no doubt Project 2025 is providing a roadmap, and they're trying to execute it pretty ruthlessly. That said, with Donald Trump, I'm always reminded of what I was told when I was a young congressman, and I just delivered a barn burner of a speech in front of the Pensacola Downtown Rotary Club. And I know it'll shock some people, but sometimes I get heated. And I had the admiral who was in charge of naval aviation training for the U.S. come up to me. He said, son, got great respect for what you're trying to do. Hope you balance the budget. Hope you achieve all of these things. But you've got to learn how to separate the signal from the ground noise. And then he sits there. He goes, I tell all my young pilots that all the time. And then he leans forward. He goes, and boy, almost all of it's ground noise. So I think it's important that we separate the signal from the ground noise in the case of Donald Trump, because, the idea is to shock. The idea is to outrage. The idea, it's about the reaction. I mean, famously, somebody had showed me a quote not so long ago where famously, oh my God, Roy Cohn told Bill Sapphire one time a long time ago. He said basically that his superpower was making his enemies hate him so much that in their pursuit of him, they destroyed themselves. And that is a real window into Donald Trump's soul.
Was Cohn saying that about?
No, Cohn was saying that about Cohn.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Cohn was telling Bill Sapphire, probably in the early 70s, that was always what he did. Was he would get people so angry they would get out of their game. I think there's a Godfather quote in there too about never let your enemies make you angry.
And of course, Roy Cohn probably, I would argue, is the most influential figure in understanding Donald Trump politically and how he operates. So, I mean, that is very interesting that he said that
without
in the early 70s. And he goes on to meet Trump, I think, in the mid 70s. But let's try to separate the signal from the noise here. You went down famously or infamously, depending on who you're talking to. I texted you at the time saying I thought it was the right move to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Donald Trump before the inauguration after a long period of probably not talking so often. Have you talked to him any time since, or was that your only discussion with him recently?
No, we had not talked to him in 7 years. And we thought, other than I did call him the morning after the assassination attempt, just to personally tell him I'm glad he was he was okay. But other than that, we'd not talked to him in 8 years. And so we thought after the election, we had been saying that he had been talking like a fascist, and we were obviously outraged by so much of what he was doing, but we figured that it was that not talking for 7 years hadn't really done anything for us. So we thought getting off the record with him and sitting and trying to figure out what was going on in his mind at that time would be helpful. And it's, like we all have off the record conversations with everybody. I mean, I do with, whether it's Macron or whether it's leaders in the Middle East or whether it's senators, and on both sides, we do it. And so had an off the record conversation, and I think we learned some things that, again, it's usually not what they want you to hear. It's what you pick up in the conversation, sort of, the meaning behind the words, where you figure out what's coming. And so I think it's provided us some insights. But again, though, I think this term is far different than last term. And it will be interesting to see what happens after this first sort of shock phase finishes up, which I suspect will be, probably the first 3 to 6 months. It'll be fascinating to see what happens next.
Have you had any follow-up conversations with him since the meeting you had?
Well, no, I haven't. I will say the one thing that I have done, though, is I've talked to people in the administration, like every other news organization. I mean, the one thing we wanted to do was we wanted to open a line of communications with the people that were working around him. And so that is something we have done. And it's I think, again, much better to be talking than not talking, much better to try to understand what their mindset is than not. And like, for instance, with the federal spending freeze, and the court rulings, and asking what their intention was. And again, even though they didn't say it openly and outwardly, it's very clear that everything they're doing is setting up, ultimately a challenge before the Supreme Court for the Impoundment Control Act, where they're going to try to stretch the boundaries of presidential power as much as possible. For those watching that don't know the whole background, that was some legislation in 1974 that Congress passed to push back against the abuses of the Nixon administration, who would also just decide what congressional appropriations they would spend and what congressional appropriations they would not spend. So I think that's probably where the administration is going. In fact, everything he seems to be doing seems to be trying to push the boundaries of his Article 2 powers as much as possible. It will be fascinating to see a few things. It'll be fascinating to see how the Supreme Court responds when it ultimately gets there. And then it'll be fascinating to see the response to the Supreme Court response, because I think the Supreme Court will rule against the administration. If you look at the precedents, if you look at what people like William Rehnquist, what people in the Reagan administration said about impoundment, say there's simply no rational basis in law or the Constitution for a president to decide what congressional appropriations he's going to spend and which ones he's not, because that's in effect what we conservatives wanted. We wanted a line item veto. We wanted the president to have the power that a lot of governors have. But the Supreme Court also ruled that was unconstitutional. So he doesn't have that power. And I don't think the Supreme Court's going to magically give it to him now.
Well, I wanted to go into this in a little bit, but how far is he willing to go? You mentioned what would be interesting, not only how the Supreme Court rules, but how Donald Trump reacts to that ruling. Do you think that he is willing? He so far has said no. I mean, he was at one of his many press outings in the Oval Office and said that, they'll appeal to courts and, he'll go through the process. Some people around him suggest that he ignore lower court rulings and go forward. Do you think he'll ignore the
Yeah.
courts?
I don't think he will, only because I don't think Republicans in Congress that will sit by quietly. There was a question last week. And by the way, there are very few issues that I would say that about.
Yeah, I was going to say, what gives
One
you
of
the
those would
confidence of the Republicans in Congress or the Senate after them not taking down any of his?
Oh my God, the least qualified. Yeah, some of the least qualified candidates ever to hold cabinet positions. Yeah. Well, I will say that actually, when there was a question a couple weeks ago about a possible constitutional crisis if Donald Trump ignored rulings, you saw numerous Republican senators, including John Kennedy of Louisiana, Lindsey Graham, and others, saying you follow the court. You follow what the courts say. Mike Rounds said it. Tom Tillis said it. You go down the long list of, and there were no Republicans other than, unfortunately, Mike Lee. I saw a tweet that Mike Lee said, talking about a coup by federal judges, which I'm sorry, but one of the craziest, most reckless things I've heard him say, when you consider that this happens every 4 years. You have Joe Biden had presidential, presidential orders that were overturned. Most famously, of course, on student loans. This just happened. So, but a lot of Republicans spoke out there. So I think that's one issue that they would.
Can I press you that? I mean, you had a lot of Republicans speak out against Kash Patel and RFK. Right. Bill Cassidy, a doctor, initially, right. And then when it comes time to vote,
outrageous.
They
outrageous.
So why do you think that, there's always murmurs, Republicans, or, off the record, there's a lot of Republicans angry at this, but then when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to stand up to certain issues, you often don't see enough Republicans stand up, or any that will stop it.
Right. I will say again, in very limited issues, they will do that. Of course, their justification for all of that was he's a president. Historically, you look, and the United States Senate almost always approves a president's nominee. So that was their justification, to put people in that were grossly unqualified, that had radical views, who I believe are dangerous for America. But they could say, this is the way things work, and advise and consent. But almost always, a president gets the people in that he wants in. I think, again, the only two cases right now where I'd say Republicans would stand up and speak out would be if the president decided to go full Andrew Jackson and say, Mr. Roberts has his court, his decision, let's see him enforce it. I don't think that would happen. I don't think it could happen, only because I think the blowback from Republicans in the House and the Senate in that one instance would be dramatic. I think in the other instance, and I could be proven wrong here, just like I'd be proven in the first case, is Ukraine. I think what we're seeing starting to develop in Ukraine is the same thing that happened in the first term, where Donald Trump would go to Helsinki, say the most humiliating, embarrassing, revolting things, saying that he trusted Vladimir Putin more than he trusted, his own intel chiefs that he appointed. And then there was great blowback. And while he was saying all the things that he was saying favorably about Vladimir Putin from 2017 through 2021, you had Republicans in the Senate pass the toughest sanctions against Russia that had been passed. You had Mike Pence, his vice president. At the same time, he was playing sort of footsie with Vladimir Putin. You'd have Mike Pence and other members of the administration saying some very tough things, taking hardline stances. And you're already starting to see that happen. General Kellogg has done that. You have Marco Rubio and others, a lot of cold warriors that are around him, who are quietly talking to Europeans, saying this is all just part of negotiations. And certainly, Tom Tillis went on the floor, spoke out, and you're going to have other Republicans, I think, speaking out against it. So I think there are one or two issues where Republicans may stand up and speak out. I'm distressed, though, that They haven't spoken out against all of the things that he's been saying, whether you're talking about taking Greenland away from Denmark, taking the canal away from Panama, taking Gaza away from the Palestinians, or taking Canada away from Canada. It's pretty outrageous. It's outrageous what he did with USAID. I'm a small government conservative, but for Elon Musk to say the outrageous things he said about what the United States does to promote soft power across the globe. You look at PEPFAR, it saved over 25 million lives. George W. Bush's PEPFAR saved over 25 million lives across Africa. We could go down the laundry list of things that Republicans should be speaking up about. They just haven't spoken up about them. I do think Ukraine will be an exception to that. And if you take what they said last week, when there's a suggestion Donald Trump may not follow court rulings at the Supreme Court, it seems that there was some pushback there.
Well, I want to get back to Ukraine and some foreign policy in a little bit, but back to your meeting at Mar-a-Lago and what you're witnessing now. What is his state of mind, and has it changed since you? Does it look like it has changed since you talked to him a month and a half ago?
So, you know, the thing. I think the thing that I gleaned from Mar-a-Lago, and I will say again, when you meet with leaders, whether it's foreign leaders who are hostile to the United States or whether they're supposedly, America's allies, you pick up a lot by what they're saying, what they're thinking, but also just body language and a thousand different cues, not only from them but the people that are around them. And I think what I picked up from Donald Trump when we were there before was that he, Maggie Haberman said that he was a guy who always felt like he was fighting for his life every 5 minutes. And the Donald Trump that a lot of people have seen since the election said he seems to have moved beyond that. I think as far as his state of mind goes, I think two things can be true at once. I think, again, he can feel like, he can exhale a little bit because they won. And the mindset of not only Donald Trump, but everybody that was close to him after the first election was he got elected. He expected immediately, for the world to throw their arms around him. And he was shocked when that didn't happen. He was shocked when there was no honeymoon. I think he was shocked when immediately the questions started rising about Russia. Legitimately, some questions rising about Russia when you look at some of the things that happened during transition and early up, whether it was with Michael Flynn or others. And so I think there was a feeling that that he was never given sort of that honeymoon. I think they're feeling like probably feeling this time that they're a little more in control of the situation. And this is just my reading of it. I have nobody's told me this, but I think they are so determined to never be back in that position again, where they have to wonder what Rod Rosenstein's going to do, where they're going to have to wonder what Jeff Sessions is going to do, where they're going to have to worry about what Bill Barr is going to do, where they're going to have to worry about what a Mueller investigation is going to do. They're they're never going to have to worry about their generals kind of quietly going behind his back, as he always felt like Mattis did and other generals did to sort of slow things down with North Korea or China. I think their mindset is that they tried to throw us in prison. They never gave me a break. Washington was after me from the second I got there. It's never going to happen again. That's their mindset. I would only say to that this mandate that he got was a point and a half. And this idea that somehow we're living in Donald Trump's America and Elon Musk's America, that somehow there's been this massive ideological shift or this massive cultural shift is just absolutely ridiculous. Because you look on election day, Donald Trump won Wisconsin. On that same day, the voters of Wisconsin sent a lesbian to the United States Senate. He won Michigan. And on that same day, in that same swing state, they sent a woman to the United States Senate. You could say the same thing. I mean, look at Ruben Gallego in Arizona, one of the more progressive members of the United States House. They sent him, a Latino progressive, to the United States Senate on the same day. They comfortably put Donald Trump in. They sent a Jewish woman to represent in Nevada, to represent them in Nevada the same day they voted for Donald Trump.
But wouldn't
So
Trump
this
argue
idea,
that's not the? I mean, he appointed Scott Basin, a gay Secretary of Treasury. That what he is fighting against is not women or gay people, but an ideology, DEI, that he wants excise, and some gay people do as well, and some women do as well. That he wouldn't see that as a rejection of whatever he sees as his movement.
yeah, but what I'm saying is there's just this gross oversimplification about what this election meant.
Yeah.
And that somehow America has changed in every way because Donald Trump won by 1.5 points, and because he won by less than a percentage point in Wisconsin, 1.5 points in Michigan and
Right.
Pennsylvania. And I'm just saying the election was very close. And again, you look at the people that were elected in those same states, it suggests, there were voters that voted for Donald Trump and Tammy Baldwin, that voted for Donald Trump and Ruben Gallego. And what I'm saying is America is not Donald Trump's America or Elon Musk's America. It is still the United States of America, as Barack Obama said in 2004. And it's not a red America or a blue America. It's a plaid America. So images of Elon Musk with a chainsaw, bragging about taking a chainsaw to the National Institutes of Health, taking a chainsaw to the FAA, taking a chainsaw to TSA, taking a chainsaw to the Department of Education, cutting grants for the University of Alabama, cutting grants for the University of Iowa, cutting grants for all of these other state schools. I mean, what I'm saying is this is a massive overreach. So this calculation, hey, I'm never going to put myself in the position again where I'm sort of behind the political 8-ball. I think they're making. I think they're making massive political mistakes. And right now, everybody may be shocked and stunned and deeply saddened by what they've seen over the first month. But there's a political gravity. 2008 Barack Obama won a massive landslide. And we heard that Democrats were going to be in charge. They had the majority of the ascendant, this ascendant majority. 2 years later, the Tea Party took over. 2004, Karl Rove said that there was going to be a permanent Republican majority. 2 years later, Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. I mean, yeah, the American people self-correct pretty quickly, pretty rapidly. And I think with all the overreach that we're seeing right now, that's likely to happen 2 years from now.
I want to go back to that interesting point you made about where Donald Trump just was 4 months ago, 5 months ago, sitting in a courtroom, vulnerable, staring at Jack Smith, potentially going to prison. And then all of a sudden, in this state of euphoria, very powerful. And there's, you mentioned one angle of it, get loyalists around him so that he's not undermined like he thought he was last time, the people that didn't disagree with him, Pete Hegseth at defense, obviously all the law positions with people that aren't Bill Barr and aren't Chris Wray. There is another side of the coin, and I wonder what insight you have into this and what you think is the revenge side. How much, he was sitting there 4 months ago staring at Jack Smith, as we said. Now he's president, has a lot of levers of power as president. Starts, in the first week taking away security from Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. And doing a few things like that, which, are one thing that he could do easily. But then there has always been the question of, does he use the DOJ to go after some of his enemies? The January 6th House Committee, Liz Cheney, people like that, General Milley. Does he use the IRS to audit people? Do you think that he is more interested in success or revenge or a combination?
Well, and I said two things could be true at once. The one thing I had already expressed to you earlier was that I'm glad you circled back to this. The one thing that he felt like he had escaped all of that. And so, of course, he was much more positive about it. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that they could all say, and they've all said, I'm going to be too busy to seek retribution. But there's no doubt he has lined things up, whether it's going after the media, whether it's going after January 6th prosecutors, whether it's going after, as you said, General Milley, whether it's going after John Bolton. I will tell you, after, one of the things that distressed me as well was going after Brian Hook. Here's a guy who had been his envoy on Iran issues and had been a very loyal State Department worker for Donald Trump. He had his security taken away, and he's on the hit list as well. He's on Iran's hit list. I mean, we have Tom Cotton saying, that there's still an imminent danger to the lives of General Milley, still an imminent danger to Ambassador Bolton, still an imminent danger to Brian Hook, and he shouldn't take that security away. Obviously, that's deeply concerning. So, there was an effort during the transition to try to convince people that they weren't going after they weren't going to seek retribution. I will say, during our meeting, while there was nothing like those words weren't spoken out loud, I did not get the sense that he had forgotten or he had forgiven for what had happened in the past. And I think the fact that the image of him with a mugshot that he always keeps handy.
Now on his wall in the
I think
Oval
that
Office.
is a constant reminder. Right,
Yeah.
now on his wall in the Oval Office. I think that answers your question.
But do you think it's possible we see prosecute? I mean, can you imagine Liz Cheney being prosecuted for who knows what?
Listen, anything's possible. I mean, look what's happened over the past month. I think anything's possible. I think what is probably more likely would be his allies in the United States House of Representatives, calling them up and forcing them to hire lawyers and testify in front of hearings at the House and kind of grind them down that way. Being harassed, we already saw Ed Martin, who's the acting U.S. Attorney for Washington, is actually going after Chuck Schumer and members of Congress who are critical of DOJ. That is so beyond the realm, so outside the borders, so outside of like even what Richard Nixon would do. I think they're going to do that. I think there's going to be a lot of harassment. I think you're also going, you're probably going to also, like I said, you'll see the congressional investigations, and I think you'll also see the media continue to be harassed.
Yeah, I was surprised when I woke up and didn't realize he was appointed. That Ed Martin I had on my old podcast 4 or 5 years ago after he was fired from CNN. The idea that he would be in a position of power was
so let me ask you: was he like at that time? Was he a traditional conservative?
No. When I had people on all over the ideological spectrum. So I brought people who were way out there. I will say that from what I remember, I had a sense that he was almost playing a game and he's playing super far right. He had just been fired from CNN for doing something or saying something on air. And I felt he would answer these questions very radically. But, I also had Darren Beatty on. He was actually kind of, I think, malicious. You could get a sense that there was something dark there.
Right.
With Ed, I almost found he saw this comical as a game. He was playing full MAGA. But then the idea that you put him in charge of a very important justice role seems. I was shocked by that. Surprised.
I've got to say I'm very surprised, and I can't be shocked anymore by the people I knew in the before times, who were conservatives, who were allies while we were fighting to balance the budget. Who were allies when we were pushing for welfare reform, who were allies when we were pushing to have a strong response to whether it was Russia or whether it was China, whether it was North Korea, whether it was Syria, whether it was Iran. I've been hate to continue to be surprised, but by all of these people that were like these Reagan conservatives who've completely thrown that aside again, and it's more like they're just playing a role right now. And I guarantee you, if for some reason after Donald Trump leaves office, if for some reason a mainstream Republican ever captures the nomination again, they'll switch right back. It's
Yeah.
it's
Well,
it's it's pretty depressing.
well, I was going to ask you later on. Do you think it's more? And I agree with you on that. Whoever leads the party kind of leads the movement. Do you think it's more likely if Donald Trump or in 2028 the nominee is someone more like J.D. Vance or more like Nikki Haley? Do you think there's a
Well, it
potential it could be
depends.
Nikki Haley?
I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends what happens in what happens in 2025 elections, 26, 27, and then going into 28. I mean, again, remember George W. Bush in 2004. They were talking about a permanent Republican majority, and the party, the party got beat up, and then they lost with McCain, and by the time Romney lost, they were ready for somebody like Donald Trump. So it depends on how they do. But again, if it is a Nikki Haley type figure, if it is a sort of more of a Main Street Republican, and by the way, the Republican Party did this before in a less dramatic way. In 2010, the Tea Party won, and by 2014, people had had enough. And contributors had had enough. And they said, hey, these people have gotten crazy. We want to win elections again. And so they got serious about putting more Main Street Republicans on the ballot. And they had a massive 2014. So you never know. You never know where a party's going to go. Unfortunately, you know where these sort of hanger-oners are going to go. And they'll suddenly remember all the things, all the Edmund Burke quotes and all the Russell Kirk quotes and all the Ronald Reagan and Buckley quotes again, if that Main Street Republican ever gets a nomination.
Speaking of 2028, someone dismissed this before the election. Now I'm not so sure. You spoke about vulnerability, and Trump was in a vulnerable position. I don't think he ever wants to be in that position again, where he could be in a courtroom.
Right.
You hear now Steve Bannon talking about it, maybe just as a troll, but these things start as a troll and build into something. Do you think there's any chance that Donald Trump will try to change the Constitution or argue that the first term was unfair to run again in 2028?
I can't predict. Again, I can't predict what he's going to do next week. I do think that, again, you will have Republican senators pushing back. But that's so far off. Again, I could have never predicted what was going to happen in the first month of the Trump administration. So it's very dangerous trying to figure out what we can expect even through the middle of March. But there will be people that might be suggesting that. But it's kind of like Donald Trump deciding that he was going to get rid of birthright citizenship by signing a presidential order. Sometimes things don't happen quite that way.
Elon Musk, you mentioned him earlier. Can you give us any insight into his thing? Have you met him? Do you know him? I believe your agent is also one of his friends.
Right.
Have you had a chance to ever have a conversation with him? And if so, is he different from Elon Musk that you talked to the one that we're seeing now?
I mean, I've spoken with him briefly, and in a situation where I was actually at Ari Emanuel's wedding, and Walter Isaacson wrote about this in his book, that Ari, being Ari, put Larry David right next to Elon Musk, knowing what would happen, and Larry David immediately started yelling at him. How could you support Republicans? What are you doing supporting Republicans? And Musk was pretty quiet there, so didn't say a whole lot. Didn't say a whole lot through the dinner. But from people who know him, Ari and other people who know him, I think their belief is Elon Musk wants to do, and his bro friends in Silicon Valley believe that the federal government should be stripped down to, its core. They should tear it down to the stubs of the house and rebuild it. That's not how Washington works. There are going to be a lot more surprises that come their way as they continue to use this sort of chainsaw approach. I think they're already starting to see that. They certainly saw it with the firing of people who were responsible for nuclear safety. They saw it when they accidentally fired people that were responsible for, trying to keep the bird flu in check. And I think they're going to find time and time again that you can't just sort of rhetorically shoot first and then cut first and then ask questions later. So I mean, I think, you talk about signal and ground noise. It's a terrible thing what they're doing, in my opinion. There was a town hall meeting down in Georgia that Greg Bluestein with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution covered of a Republican who easily won his district. And he was just absolutely overwhelmed by hostile voices in his town hall meeting. It reminded me a lot of when people went around holding town hall meetings while Barack Obama was trying to pass the Affordable Care Act, and people were saying, you can't do this because I won't be able to keep my own doctor. But I think you're going to see a lot more of that. You have MAGA senators, like a certain MAGA senator from the state of Alabama who suddenly is concerned because my alma mater is it's because of Richard Shelby and Alabama senators over the past 20 years. The University of Alabama has got a ton of federal funding, a ton of federal grants. Its engineering program has gotten really good. They've become a very competitive school. But now there are a lot of these programs that are being cut, and a lot of funding is being cut without even, without, again, much thought put into it. So, that's the University of Alabama is the state of Alabama's number one employer. Yeah. And that's going to impact not only Katie Britt and other representatives in that state, but you're going to see the same thing happening. The University of Iowa is having to make massive cuts and because of NIH funding cuts, and you're going to see that happening in a lot of red states and a lot of purple states and a lot of blue states. And so, I know what they want to do. I know what they're trying to do. I think they're trying to send a message, but they're not going to find $1 trillion. And they're not going to be able to pay for a fraction of the tax cut that they're trying to pass. And they're not going to do anything that is going to bring that $36 trillion debt down, because 90% of the budget is consumed by defense spending, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. By the time you get to the last 10, 12% that they're going after right now, that small portion is a portion that most Americans consider to be what government actually does, which, keep their food safe, keep the air clean, keep the water they drink safe, make sure that the skies are friendly, for traveling. So it's, again, I think they're going about it all wrong. And the word that was used last night in this town hall meeting, I think it was a Republican who said it, said I'm all for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, but I can't believe how sloppy this approach is. And it really is. It's just a sloppy approach. And I hope that, after a month of doing it this way, somebody will put on the brakes and try to step up and do it in a more reasonable, rational way that actually makes sense. So you are making government more effective. You are making government more productive. You are making, are streamlining government in smart ways instead of in sloppy ways.
But it sounds like from the people you talk to, I mean, seeing Elon at CPAC yesterday with the glasses on, I honestly didn't look.
And the chainsaw.
Entirely well. I mean, it was a little strange. It's like I forget who said it. Someone said it was like John Mulaney on the Late Night Show before he went to rehab. Meanwhile,
Right.
there,
Yeah.
while he's on stage, one of his, I guess, mothers of his children's tweeting at him to contact her. He's been trying to contact her to deal with a crisis for one of the children or something like that. This is the Elon that they know from building these great companies. We're not seeing a different Elon here. We're not seeing a mental break of any sort.
Are you asking?
Yeah, I'm saying people who know Elon more than I do. The Elon we're seeing, none of them are saying this is a different guy. This is not a guy who built those companies.
Well, I mean, Walter Isaacson, when I asked Walter a year ago or 6 months ago about Elon, he had said that, there are 5 or 6 different Elons. One day you go there to interview Elon Musk, and he's Elon Musk, the sort of Henry Ford of our generation, the Steve Jobs of our generation. The next day you go there, he's completely wired and angry and yelling. The next day you get somebody else. The next day you get somebody else. So I think there's always been several different sides of Elon. I don't know him, and don't know him, and haven't really spoken to people that know him really well that long. But it certainly does seem. I'll just say I'm concerned by the images that I'm seeing and concerned by the imagery that I'm seeing. He's a guy that knows how to make rockets. He's a guy that knows how to make cars. I don't know that he's a guy that has proven himself to be very effective in building a social media company or facing outward toward the public in a lot of different ways. And I got to believe that people in the White House, I have no information on this, but I've got to believe that somebody in the White House has to be concerned by that image of him, with a chainsaw, holding it up in the air, bragging about taking a chainsaw to government at the same time that you have NIH funding cuts that will literally risk the lives of Americans whose lives have been made better and whose lives have been saved by extraordinary medical advances and scientific advances of the NIH. The same thing with the FAA, the same thing with food and drugs. I mean, you could just go down the list of things. I think that is a terrible political image that may fire up, the base, may fire up 25% of Americans. But I think you have a lot more people who voted for Donald Trump for a lot of different reasons than to see Elon Musk take a, quote, chainsaw to government.
Let me close with this, Joe, because I know that you have another commitment soon after. You mentioned earlier this is the shock phase that you thought would last 3 to 6 months. What is after the shock phase?
Mm-hmm.
After the 3 and 6 months, what do you expect to see after the shock phase is over?
I don't know. Again, it's hard. It's hard to predict what's going to happen next. I think we've all been overwhelmed, or most of us have been overwhelmed by what's happened over the past month. But I will say, the one thing that I know, and I'm sure you know, and everybody else knows, this is by design. Everything they're doing is by design to intimidate, to intimidate Democrats, to keep Democrats off balance, to keep their opponents off balance. And so that's the phase we're in right now. What happens when a lot of these court rulings come down and they're ruled against? What happens when they don't get exactly what they want out of a lot of these actions that clearly push the limits of the president's authority and clearly impedes on the authority of the United States Congress? What happens with this polling? What happens, in swing states, with polling in swing states in North Carolina, where Tom Tillis has to win in 26, in Maine, where Susan Collins has to win in 26, in Michigan, and all of these swing states where there are important Senate races that are coming up. in 2026. We'll see not only how Donald Trump and the administration responds, we'll also see how those individual members of Congress respond. So far, Republicans haven't spoken out enough. I suspect if the numbers go the way they're probably going to go, I suspect that we will see more Republicans speaking out. And by the way, those numbers that may move, and some polls are already suggesting that some of the numbers are moving. The negatives are moving into the 50s and hardening pretty much. They're not hardening when you read the articles and see what the respondents said because of Elon Musk necessarily, or because of Greenland, or because of Canada. They're hardening because prices are still high. They're afraid inflation's going to continue to go up. The economy's still hot. Interest rates don't seem to be going down anytime soon. Housing is still too expensive in a lot of places. We have an economy that right now I think is resting on three bubbles. One is the fiscal bubble, a $36 trillion debt. It's only going to get worse if you look at the Republican spending plan and their tax cutting plan. You've got the crypto bubble, which is just outrageously inflated right now. And then you have the stock market bubble that you're starting to see some of the sort of air kind of go out of that. But when Warren Buffett moves all of his money to cash, there's a reason. He did it before the dot-com boom. He did it before 2008. He's done it again. So I suspect that all the talk of tariffs and all the talk of trying to pressure Jay Powell to bring interest rates down, which would be just a nightmare for working Americans because of the inflation that it would cause when the economy's already running too hot. I think all of that combined probably may harden those numbers even more. What we found was the things that concerned us the most, Mika and me and other people that were on my show the most, where you talk about democracy. For Mika, it was women's choice. Some of the violent rhetoric that was used, some of the fascist sounding rhetoric that was used out there. The things that bothered us the most weren't necessarily the things that moved voters. What moved voters, James Carville was right in 92. It's the economy, stupid. Moved voters. One of our great frustrations in the 1990s, going after Bill Clinton, thinking that, Bill Clinton shouldn't have left office with a 60% plus approval rating. Carville was right. It was the economy, stupid. If you've got a good, strong economy, then usually the American people will stay with you. And so I think that's the big question mark right now with this economy that right now I think is floating on three different bubbles that could burst at any time. Big question is, where do voters go? And if voters move away from this administration, what does that mean for Republicans in the Senate and the House? Will they be more willing to take stands against some of the more outrageous extreme policy positions?
Joe Scarborough, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
All right. It's great talking to you. Thanks so much for having me.